science, logic, and reasoning take time. You need time to prove the consistency of a result. You need time to further refine patterns. You need time to preview and review the data with people well-versed in the understandings necessary to intelligently challenge information as a key part of verifying and validating data. It's interesting to note that even though we can disseminate information quickly thanks to digital technology, it takes a massive amount of time for properly reviewed new research data to be integrated into large systems such as the medical system, the economic system, and the education system. It takes precisely 17 years for medical research to be integrated into medical practice. It takes 26 years for educational research to be integrated into schools. In the case of medicine, research from the last 17 years has dramatically exploded outdated paradigms and offered us many paradigm-shattering ideas that have the potential to radically change our perception of what it takes to heal, as well as the integral components of the healing process. Today's guest, Dr. Shamini Jain, is a clinical psychologist, scientist, and social profit leader. She's the founder and CEO of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, a collaborative accelerator that forwards the science and practice of healing. She's also the author of the Nautilus Award-winning book, Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health. I hope you enjoy this powerful conversation about healing and the evolution of medicine.
You're listening to Quantum Revolution with Karen Curry Parker, exploring new frontiers in consciousness, science, and evolution. Join us in intimate conversations with cutting-edge scientists, spiritual leaders, artists, disruptors, and visionaries who are working towards reframing the narrative of our future by healing the rift between spirituality and science, reclaiming creativity, and laying the foundation for a new world. And now, here's your host, Karen Curry Parker.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Quantum Revolution. I am here today with Shamini Jain, who is the founder of Consciousness and Healing Initiative. She's also the author of Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health, and the creator of the Science of Healing Ourselves course. We have a lot of things to talk about today, and I'm really excited to be sharing this time with you because I have some big questions for you. And my very first question that I just want to dive into is, what is going on with medicine right now? Where are we at?
It's a great question, Karen. And honestly, what we see happening in medicine is just sort of reflecting what's going on in the world, right? Where we're seeing a lot of density and we're seeing a lot of polarization, and we're at a choice point as a humanity, which is, are we going to continue to play sides and think that if we go toward one path that we have to get rid of another one? Or are we going to take a step back and really explore what it means to see, for example, healing and medicine from multiple perspectives and truly integrate them for what we call whole person healing? So it's really no different, in my view, from some of what we see, in politics and different groups where we see forces that are really trying to pin us in one side versus another. And honestly, Karen, I don't believe in that. I'm a trained clinical psychologist. I was trained in a very kind of in-the-box program, you can say, at UC San Diego. I did my initial work at Columbia University in neuroscience. So I've gone to some of the best schools, and I understand how limiting the academic view can be, certainly. And that informs a lot of how we do medicine. But what I've also noticed is that sometimes as we critique, and we certainly can and should, the systems that we have right now and we want them to evolve, we can almost push everything away as if we think there's no value in what has been created. And I think that's part of the issue. So what I think is really going on is there's an opportunity for each of us to really come into our own power with our own health and our own health decision-making and take in the actual data about how we heal. And, as you know, I'm super excited about that. I go over a lot of this in my book. It's really mind, body, spirit healing. And you'll see in the beginning of my book, I say, you don't have to feel like you need to make an either or choice here. Healing is on the physical, energetic, emotional, mental, spiritual, and societal level, right? All of those factors play a huge role in our health. And for those who are really in the know in medicine and science, they know this, right? We know this. It's just that these systems that we have, including the medical system, are sometimes slow to change. You know, there's a 17-year evidence to practice gap in medicine, which means even a, mainstream discovery in science doesn't actually translate into the clinic for a really long time. Now, that's pretty unacceptable. And what's cool is we have ways of disseminating evidence-based information, including our discussions today, right? And other ways to help reduce that practice gap so that we can come into our own power of healing and say, what can I do now for myself? And what can I do now for my clients? But I want to stress that doesn't mean that we need to kind of get angry and get our backs up and eschew everything that we know about medicine, because I think there's some good kernels of what we've learned. It's just really incomplete, like so many of our systems.
So I'm listening to this and my mind is going in a bunch of different directions just because I want to share with people just a very concrete example of that 17-ish year lag time. I was certified, or I trained, I wasn't certified at the time because there wasn't certification, but I trained with Gary Craig in 2000 to learn to do EFT. I was at that time a nurse by training, a registered nurse. And at that time, several people were actually losing their licenses for tapping. It was considered to be inappropriate touching, right? And so my experience with using EFT with my clients was so overwhelmingly positive. I decided to actually give up my license to keep tapping because I didn't want to risk, it. I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and it was a professional energy psychology conference. And the people attending the conference were physicians and psychiatrists, and they were all doing tapping at that point. And I'm thinking, how interesting is it that now we are, 15,000 peer-reviewed studies later, 17 years, now we're starting to see this trickle down into not necessarily really the mainstream, but at least trickle down into where it's a little bit more accepted. I think we do see that time frame and that gap. What do you think needs to happen? Or do you think that gap is just inevitable?
Not at all inevitable. And I just want to align with you because, I mentioned I'm a clinical psychologist. I too am not licensed because I did my healing training work with Reverend Rosalind Bruyere. And that is a very hands-on approach. Rosalind is all about, I can tell you stories. It wasn't until recently that, she started being okay with distant healing. Interestingly, in January 2020, she had her only intensive on distant healing. And we as her students were all flabbergasted. Rosalind's teaching distant healing. Then, of course, the pandemic happened. So she was clearly guided to do that. But because as a clinical psychologist, I would lose my license if I touched people, I decided not to sit for my licensure because I want to be able to use every tool that I can when I'm working with a client to heal them. And now look where we are with EFT, for example, and even Biofield therapies. I go over a lot of this data in my book, but EFT, as you know, is now considered really up with the gold standard of treatments for mental health, including anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and others. It's tremendous. And as you said, we have a lot of professionals that are learning how to use it. Biofield or energy healing therapies are part of that too. And, when we look at the data behind things like Reiki, healing touch, therapeutic touch, I've done a lot of those systematic reviews and randomized controlled trials and, different clinical trials in these areas as a researcher. And I've also kind of pulled together the data across the board for these practices. And what we know about them when we look very carefully, systematically, scientifically, we compile the data from all of those kinds of healing, hands-on healing, hands-off healing practices. They are effective in reducing pain. They are effective in reducing anxiety in different populations, reducing symptoms in cancer, and also reducing symptoms in dementia. And I go over this more deeply, Karen, in my book. I think it's entirely possible to reduce that evidence to practice gap. But part of it is also about educating people on what the evidence base is. And with the healing work, there's some incredible work going on right now that I want to make sure people know about. Beyond even the clinical studies that are out there, there's some groundbreaking studies that have already begun to be published from our colleagues, for example, at MD Anderson Cancer Center, showing how energy healing can reduce the spread of tumors in mice models of cancer,
Yeah.
down to reductions of inflammatory cytokines, which are kind of like immune transmitters in the body, down to cell signaling molecules. I mean, the science is going really deep and it's about to become even more groundbreaking. People who are interested in the science of energy healing really want to stay tuned and keep in touch with the space in the coming year or two, because we're going to see some really groundbreaking work coming out from some of these labs. So it takes time to change minds, as you've seen with the EFT work. There has been a group of diligent people conducting research, and research does help to move the needle in clinics and hospitals. There are other ways too, right? And that includes educating ourselves on the practices so that we who are out there doing practice with patients can be evidence informed, even if our hospital administrator doesn't know yet. We may find out about a therapy that we could use with our clients that's really helpful. The other thing, Karen, that we're doing at my nonprofit, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, where we've really taken a deep dive into this area of healing and kind of shared about the scientific landscape. We have a lot of resources for the community with our nonprofit, which I can share later. We're also looking at healing on the community level, because the evidence to practice gap is about the lab to the hospital, right? But what about out in the community? I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now, for example, around mental health and what we can do on the community level and even peer-to-peer care for mental health. Part of the work that we're doing a trial right now comparing a distant sound healing approach for anxiety compared to gold standard of care for communities kind of out there. And what's cool about this is if our trial actually demonstrates that these kinds of Biofield healing approaches are as good as standard of care for the community, guess what? We can go out there and train community members. They don't even need a PhD or an MD to do some of these healing practices. Yeah, we go through training and certification, but it's way more accessible. So I think it's entirely possible to reduce that evidence to practice gap. I really do. And community care is one way, and sharing the research is another. And then finally, training ourselves in the practices and not waiting for someone to tell us what to do.
Beautifully said. So I'm going to try to articulate what's going through my head, because I really want to address something that I think is a place where there's a lot of division or divisiveness in the integrative / holistic health community. You know, I'll go back again to my journey with EFT. In the beginning, when people started tapping, I would say that a large majority of the people who were embracing EFT were lay people. They weren't necessarily professional people. And I would say certainly if we look at Reiki, healing touch, I think sort of tends to fall more into the nursing community, but some of these techniques and even sound baths and sound healing, and they're being carried out into the community through lay people. And I hear in the healing community this division between, well, we can't afford to wait for the science. And I think when the anecdotal evidence is pretty overwhelming and the possibility of injuring people feels pretty low, that I think it's okay to run with the anecdotal evidence. But there's also a certain, I'll call it a belief gap or a credibility gap when you have a group of lay people who are running and doing good work and the science hasn't caught up yet. How do we close that gap, and how do we not disrespect the people who are really on the ground, on the front lines, doing the work? And also, how do we allow them to be part of integrating this into a higher, more scientific-based body of data as well? Because I think we need both. I think we need people on the front line, and we need the science.
Well, and this is what we do at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. Every single project that we do is collaborative. It involves healers and it involves scientists. And the healers that are involved are those that are literally on the ground delivering care, right? So this is the way we partner, because as scientists, we know what we know, but we don't know everything, right? We don't even know how the practice is being delivered, who it's being delivered to, what they're seeing. So everything that we do is first and foremost sitting with the practitioner and say, what are you noticing? What are you doing out there to reduce suffering? How does it work in your view? Who are you working with? And then we actually try to model that in our studies, working collaboratively with the practitioners to say, what kinds of methods and measures do you think are important? We go to the patients too. This is what we call patient-centered outcomes research, where we make sure that we're capturing the data that actually matters for the people who are getting the care, including those delivering the care. In that way, you're helping bridge the gap both between science, because people are familiar with things like randomized controlled trials. I don't want to get too technical here, but there's something called efficacy research, which is typically how we think of research. It's in the lab, you control for everything. I've done those kinds of studies. One of my more well-known studies is published in the journal Cancer. It was a randomized placebo-controlled trial of energy healing for cancer-related fatigue. We saw improvements in fatigue, improvements in cortisol rhythms over the day, some really groundbreaking stuff. There is actually quite a bit of groundbreaking research. It's just that we've got to get it more out there. So it's not that science hasn't totally caught up, but where we need to catch up is in what we call effectiveness research, which is where we're really doing what I'm talking about, where we're actually getting out there and capturing what's happening in the real practice outside of the lab, but actually out in the community and with the community. And that research is beginning to happen just as we saw with mindfulness and yoga, where those things were considered foreign and weird and, and all of that. It took some time, right? And investment. So we do have to invest in our communities, invest in delivering care, and invest in the research that demonstrates the power of that care. And that's what happened with yoga. That's what happened with meditation. We just continue on. And I got to tell you, you mentioned the energy psychology folks. They've been great. They've been really coherent and moving forward over decades. Many in the Biofield healing work are doing the same. I'm proud of all of the work that our initiative, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, has been doing to help forward this in a real collaborative way. This goes back to your initial question. What are we seeing in medicine? Part of the problem with medicine is different disciplines aren't talking to each other the way they should. My home research field that I got my PhD in which I apply to my research and also my teaching, is a field called psychoneuroimmunology. They joke, if you can say that 7 times, you get your degree, right? So we usually say P&I for short. Well, P&I didn't exist 60 years ago. Because 60 years ago, we didn't even think that our emotions had anything to do with our health. We didn't think the brain and the immune system were connected. And it was because of multidisciplinary collaboration where we brought these communities of doctors, patients, scientists of different disciplines together that we formed psychoneuroimmunology. And it's been huge for our understandings in medicine and healing. Because we now know about the gut-brain axis. We know that there's actually immune cells in the brain. We didn't even think to look before. So it's all perspective shifting, and perspective shifting can't happen unless you're bringing together multiple streams of wisdom. That's why in our work, we always make sure we're bringing people who are really developed in their spiritual practice, in their healing practice, and in their empirical or science practice, and the educators who can actually get out there and talk about this in ways that people can understand. That's really important too.
So where do you see, if let's say we were fast forward 10 years, where do you see medicine evolving? What is a modern, let's say modern medical clinic going to look like?
Well, you go in and you meet with a team, and that team does a whole person, whole health assessment. So that when you go in, whatever practitioner you're seeing, whether they have an MD, an ND, they're an acupuncturist, they're a psychologist, whoever they are, they're going to inquire about your home life, your work life, the environment you live in, the food that you eat, your mental and emotional state, as well as your blood work. And there are practitioners, as you well know, that do this now, but they don't always talk to each other. When we are able to kind of create clinics that really have multidisciplinary treatment teams who get all of this data and then can discuss it and, dare I say, potentially use things like AI tools to help scour the evidence base and make evidence-informed decisions on, this person seems to be having, for example, a major issue with chronic pain. Well, what does the evidence say about holistic and integrative approaches to chronic pain beyond medications? Well, acupuncture supported, chiropractic supported, energy healing supported. What does the patient want, right? Present the patient with these options and say, here's some options, here's some places. But a lot of what I hear, Karen, and maybe you get this too, is where can I find a good healer? I have a feeling I'm into it. I can even afford to pay out of pocket. Ideally, we're not going to have to pay out of pocket to get these healing services. That's a whole other discussion.
Right.
But part of it is just that initial kind of whole system, whole person assessment where everyone's really clued in that all of these things work together. And, if you were sleeping more, that would actually impact your immune system in this way. And that toxic relationship, let's see if we can kind of figure out ways to work through that, because that's affecting your autonomic nervous system. So a real understanding of how these things work together and a dedicated plan that's evidence informed to be able to work through it. Honestly, all of the solutions are really out there. Now it's just going to take a dedicated group of us to put these things together and scale it.
I'm excited because I will say that I keep joking. I'm old enough now to see the trajectory. In the beginning of my career, we were not home birthing. We weren't allowed to touch our laboring clients. We definitely weren't tapping. And to see sort of the arc of just how we've shifted our perspective, even in the mainstream over the last 20 years, has been pretty beautiful. So I have a lot of hope that we're continuing to move into this integrative, holistic perspective on the root of well-being and healing. So I thank you for all the work that you've contributed to this incredible evolution of medicine as we know it.
Yeah. And Karen, if I might, you mentioned the root of healing. So where does this all lead us to? And I kind of want to share stuff that I've shared in my TEDx talk on healing recently and in my book, which is, I've talked with a lot of different healers and practitioners. And as those who are familiar, for example, with energy healing, which has been a big focus of my work, you might know, there's so many approaches. Even in energy psychology, there are a lot of approaches, right? And people see the energy field differently. They feel it differently. They work with it differently. And sometimes people will ask, well, how can all of these things work? They're all different. Now, as a psychologist, I know this well because different forms of psychotherapy work pretty much equivalent. It's actually called the dodo bird effect. It was published, over 20 years ago by Wempold and colleagues, showing that different forms of psychotherapy are pretty much the same for many forms of mental health. So how does that work? Well, what are healers saying is actually happening? What is the root of healing? And they'll all say, Shamini, I'm not the healer. I am the healing agent. I am an agent of the healing force. And what I'm doing is I'm working, in this case, with the person's energy field, right? Their psyche and their energy. Very clear, energy healers work with energy. I'm working with their energy to help them facilitate a deeper connection with the core of who they are, whether we call that soul, spirit, God, goddess, universe, universal life energy, a lot of terms for it, right? But it is in that reconnection that we allow for healing to take place. The rest is all technique. And technique is fine, but going back again to what's wrong with medicine, what's wrong with our viewpoint? We're so focused on like those techniques and those processes and those protocols as if that's the healer. The true healer is your spirit. All of these things are bringing you back to your spirit. And what I think is really beautiful about that is that the evidence really supports that. So whether you choose to do, for example, meditation, qigong, tai chi, yoga, the data actually shows you that you're going to get benefit. It doesn't matter which one you choose. They're all kind of doing similar things to the body mind. The same thing with healing. There are more similarities than differences. And why? Because you're just coming back to the core of your consciousness. And when you come back to that, you are helping to clear the path of all of the disturbances that typically keep you from your healing light. And it really is that simple. It's so hard to explain to, the typical card-carrying scientist that really seems to be what's going on. But I mean, to me, honestly, that's where the juice is. That's really the exciting evolution that I think we're going to see in medicine, is that honoring and that recognition of the connection with the spiritual force, however we describe that in the healing process.
So remembering that we're hardwired to exist in a state of well-being.
Yeah, we're hardwired to heal. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you. Your book, if people want to learn more about your book, which is called Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health, you can go to healingourselvesbook.com. Tell us what's on your webpage there.
Yeah, absolutely. So pleased that the book won a Nautilus Award, and you'll see when you go to healingourselvesbook.com, a lot of praise from colleagues about the book. And the book is really divided into 3 parts. The first part kind of covers the philosophy of ancient and modern. What is consciousness? What are the subtle bodies? How did ancient cultures understand them? And then the second part is really the evidence behind things like unpacking placebo and reframing it into what it really is, holistic elements that activate life force. what's the data behind mind, body, spirit practices and energy healing, and where is it going? How does energy get into the skin? How do we think it works? And then the third part is super practical. It's called the healing keys. And I teach out of this a lot. I'm going to be teaching actually a program at Sivananda Ashram soon and in the Maldives and different places this year, more practically in person for people. But I teach a lot online at Shift Network and other places too. And the healing keys are literally those nuggets that we can all use for ourselves and for our clients in fostering that deeper connection with the healing force. So that's the third part of the book. And if you go to healingourselvesbook.com, you'll get access to a lot of really cool bonuses, including interviews I've done with my dear friends and colleagues, Deepak Chopra, Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, Donna Eden. So some really nice video interviews with their perspectives on healing. There is a free ebook on Biofield devices, kind of really helping us understand where we really are in the wild west of these devices, which ones have evidence, which ones don't. Should I try some? So there's a lot there. And there's some meditations too that people often ask me for that are there as part of the bonuses. So they can check out those bonus materials. And that page will take you to my website where you can kind of just learn more, watch TEDx talks and different things.
Awesome. So that's healingourselvesbook.com. You also have a course, The Science of Healing. You want to tell us a little bit about that too?
Yeah, the Science of Healing course is dynamite. It's offered through my nonprofit, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And true to Chi form, as I said, we source multiple streams of wisdom. So this course is the definitive evidence-based course in healing. And it's really beautiful and rich. Every week you get a healing practice from a top healer, including Donna Eden, Cindy Dale, Eileen McCusick, Pamela Miles, and more. So you're getting self-healing practices from all these energy healers from different perspectives. You're also getting overviews of the evidence, as well as, for those who want to dive deep, even peer-reviewed published papers on a certain topic, consciousness, the biofield, placebo, energy healing. There are over 35 guest faculty with some of our favorite folks, including amazing researchers who you may not have heard of, and our leading lights like Deepak Chopra and Greg and Bruce and many, many others. So it's really a fantastic offering. People can go to scienceofhealingcourse.com to learn more about it. And I got to say, we offer CE credits for nurses and for mental health professionals. We hope to have more CE credits for other practitioners, including chiropractic, acupuncture, medical docs as well soon. And the feedback on it has really been tremendous because it's just really well laid out. I'm very, very happy with it. And everyone else seems to be too.
That sounds exciting. So, all right, so scienceofhealingcourse.com, healingourselvesbook.com. And of course, if you want to check out more of Shamini's work with the Chi, with Consciousness and Healing Initiative, that website is chi.is. So thank you again so much for joining us. I have so much hope and inspiration about where we're headed, and I'm looking forward to continuing to explore how we can better help people tap into their natural healing ability. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Karen. It was a pleasure.
It doesn't just take time to change systems. It takes time to change minds. Systems and people are suspicious by nature. Leading-edge scientists and researchers are often ridiculed and run the risk of losing their credibility or their funding, especially if their research findings indicate that we can heal people in ways that are cheap, easy, and intimate. For example, we know from research that we can shrink tumors by sending energy to them or alter our immune response by telling better stories about who we are. We know that stress can cause physical distress, even that elevated cortisol levels, the result of stress, can affect learning and growth in children. And yet, our current medical system only treats the body. Complementary, holistic, and mind-body healing aren't usually covered by insurance, leaving people's financial hands tied, and many integrative, scientifically valid healing modalities out of reach for many. Let's take a moment and imagine a world where our medical system doesn't just treat the symptoms of distress, but tackles the root of the stress. Imagine a healthcare system that treats the whole person, even the whole family in some cases. A healthcare system that is accessible to everyone and supports sustainable long-term healing. This is the world that many medical scientists and pioneers like Shamini Jain are fighting for. If you want to learn how you can start telling a better story about who you are and activating higher states of well-being in your life, I invite you to visit www.quantumalignmentsystem.com and get your free quantum human design chart. I'm Karen Curry Parker. Thank you for joining me for Quantum Revolution.
Thank you for joining us on Quantum Revolution with Karen Curry Parker. For more information on how to change your world and to hear more about our guest today, visit quantumrevolutionpodcast.com. Make sure you follow us on your favorite podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode of Quantum Revolution. We'll see you next time for some more groundbreaking conversations with Karen and her guests. How will you impact your world today?